Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of Anxiety, Depression, and Suicide through the Lens of Autism, presented by Autism Virtually, co-hosted by me, Jen, Mandy, Lisa, and Jeff. Today, we're going to be talking about depression. If you haven't already viewed the training on anxiety, please take the time to do so before attending to this small training. Often, we'll see that we refer back to some information previously, as when we did this training, we did it in one lump sum, but now we've broken it down. So it's very important that you watch each section. You'll find a link to our anxiety training in the comments section below. So, what is depression? Depression is a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. Depression causes feelings of sadness and/or a loss of interest in activities you once enjoyed. It can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems and can decrease your ability to function at work and at home, and also at school if you happen to be a student. So what are some of the major causes of depression? Listed here: abuse, drug or alcohol abuse, excessive stress, genetic factors and biological factors. For example, maybe depression runs in your family, relationship problems, poor nutrition, physical illnesses, and low self-esteem. So when we think of the autistic population, you can understand why this population may be more prone to depression, as they experience abuse, excessive stress, relationship problems, poor nutrition based on, in my son's case, what 10 foods he likes to eat. I don't think most of them are very nutritious. Physical illnesses brought on by, as we talked about before, anxiety and being in anxiety for a long period of time breaks down your body. Your organs start acting all funky, so you get pretty sick. And low self-esteem. We talked about in the last training how oftentimes it is hard to figure out, am I looking at a function of my child, teen, adult's autism, or am I looking at anxiety? Oftentimes, some anxiety behaviors can mimic what we expect to see in autistic individuals. And depression is the same way. Many red flags of depression in children and adults of the autistic population are already on display. So as a result, it can be really hard for parents and professionals to pick up on the depressive symptoms in an autistic person. I'd like to use this infographic on the right as a really good example of this. So let's talk about my son a little bit. My son is 21. He has autism. He's autistic. Correct? He suffers from anxiety. He suffers from depression. He suffers from a sleep disorder. So as a mom, when my son's a teen and I'm trying to look to see if he's feeling depressed, I'll come across an infographic like this. So be aware of these 5 depression red flags. Okay, got it. Number 1, changes in eating habits and sleeping patterns. I wouldn't know what a sleeping pattern looks like in my son. He rarely sleeps, even with medication and help. And as for changes in eating habits, I mentioned to you already that my son eats like 10 main things. So there isn't going to be a lot of change. That is not helpful to me. Number 2, inability to have fun on activities they loved in the past. Well, actually, looking backwards, knowing now that my son was suffering from a bout of depression, he spent all his time doing things that he loved that were really fun for him. So that, again, not super helpful. Number 3, anger issues. When you have a child, a teen, an adult who is autistic, they also suffer from sensory craziness, right? And if you're talking about a teen, then you've got the puberty craziness already going on top of that. And my kid's not sleeping. So of course he's going to get angry sometimes. But when you're the parent of an autistic child, teen, or adult, you think perhaps it's just this person letting some air out so that they don't pop, right? You don't think my son is depressed. Number 4, feeling tired most of the time. That is a joke because that is life all the time. Not helpful. Number 5, overall sadness, crying for no obvious reason. Well, if your person is like my son, then my son internalizes his feelings. So if he's feeling sad, he doesn't make a sad face. If he's feeling angry, he doesn't get all tense and ragey. If he's feeling super happy, he doesn't jump up and down with excitement. For example, I know that I've nailed a gift when I get an ooh. When I get that ooh, to me, that is a home run. I know I've nailed that. If my son showed his emotions outwardly, he'd be jumping up and down saying, woohoo, this is the best present ever. I love it. Perfect. But he internalizes his emotions. Yeah, I hear you, Lola. So again, number 5, not helpful. And I'm going to call BS on this bottom part. 4 in 5 teenagers who commit suicide. Let's change that language. 4 in 5 teenagers who we lose to suicide exhibit clear red flags as to what their intentions are. Now, this just can't be true. Because for every one person in the general population we lose to suicide, depending on what study you're looking at, we lose 3 to 6 autistic individuals. Sometimes that could even be preteens to suicide. Now, as horrifying as that statistic is, here's another one. Autistic people make up 1% of the world's population. General population, 99%. So I want you to think about that, right, Lola? Yes, it is terrible. So one person in 99% of the world's population versus 3 to 6 people in just that 1%. If we were going to truly make that number accurate, it's absolutely horrifying to think about what number that would actually be. Now, I'd like to reintroduce you to Dr. Botha. Dr. Botha, we listened to a bit for our anxiety training, and they talked about anxiety statistics within the autistic population and within the general population. Because we have a bit more time, I'd actually like to let Dr. Botha talk a bit longer, not only about depression and suicide in autistic individuals, but why they believe that we have a world that looks the way it does, and the impassioned plea they make for change.
Depression. 25% in the non-autistic community, some point over their life, will have a form or a bout of depression. Pretty sad numbers. There's the autistic community. You're looking at almost 3/4 of the community ending up with depression. And again, it's this idea that sadness is woven into our DNA, as if we are no more than this autism, and so we're born to end up depressed. And I think that that is a sad way to look at the world, and I think anyone in here would. And we can continue to say that it's part of the genes, but I offer a different explanation, which I'll get onto. There's some scary numbers actually that I didn't put on the board because it would mean accepting them as reality. Those numbers are that 64% of people with autism have suicidal thoughts. 64%. Think about that for a minute, because it would be like 1 in 3 none, and it would be 2/3 of the audience who end up feeling suicidal. And of that, before the age of 17% of people with autism will attempt suicide. That's horrific. And I didn't put them on the board actually because it would mean accepting them as reality, and I can't do that because I've got too many friends and too many family members who are also autistic. And it would be like standing them in a row and saying that one of them is going to be lost. Now, those numbers are terrifying, and here's where I put it down to. Discrimination against autistic persons is the rule rather than the exception. And that's a UN rights expert, so think about that for a minute. In my small lifetime, 23 years, I have faced some pretty horrible experiences in where I tell someone that I have autism, that I'm autistic, and I get met with varying responses. Some of them are pleasant, some of them are surprised. The majority of them are, but you're a little bit too pretty to have autism. Some of them are, oh good God, I'm so sorry, that must be horrendous. And I'm like, I never thought of it like that, but okay. Some of them are lacking, they're like, oh, but you can't actually be autistic. And that's the problem. You can tell someone that you're autistic, but chances are, if you talk, they're not going to believe you. Which brings me to this scale. There's a high-functioning autistic individual and a low-functioning, and we in the community actually hate this language because it narrows people down. Because I started talking by a certain age, I am classed as high-functioning. If I had waited a few more months before developing an attitude, I would be classed as low-functioning. The funny thing is, it's the different sides that people see to me. I've been on 3 different types of medication for anxiety. I have frequent autistic meltdowns where I rock backwards and forwards, pick at my skin, headbang, and nod in the music sense of the word, where I would be described as low functioning. And no one sees that part of me because I keep it to those closest. The rest of the world sees a bright girl who they describe as having a bright future, which means that they think that I don't struggle. 42% of people with autism, if they end up getting a job, will be fired because they cannot socially fit in. They can do the job, that's fine, but they can't socially fit in. And bear in mind, that number is within 18% of people who actually get employed. Because if you have autism, if you are autistic, despite it just meaning that you look at the world a little bit differently, that's the chance you have of being employed in the first place. Less than 1 in 5 people on the spectrum end up in full-time employment. And then we wonder why, when we go back, you've got that. I mean, it's kind of common sense, you'd think. So my research is basically taking this and saying, well, actually, it's a form of minority stress. Because we fit into literally a small minority of the population, and the discrimination that we deal with day in, day out, has wear and tear. So 43% of autistic adults lost their job because of not having, or because of having or disclosing autism. So some of it was literally walked into the office and said, hey, I'm autistic. And they were like, oh, might as well go empty out your drawers then, which is really awkward. And the problem is there's lots of people who are like, oh yeah, but you've got discrimination laws for this. But the problem is they don't come into play fast enough. The time that it takes to actually get a lawsuit like that to go through, where you're like, actually, I got fired because I have autism, already wears down on A, your mental health, B, your financial well-being, and C, your physical health because of stress. 10% of autistic individuals received support from their employers. That's it. That's a terrifying number. That is a terrifying number because even if you disclose your autism and you manage to hold on to your job, which you're fairly lucky to be able to do, only 1 in 10 get help, and that's despite 50% wanting it. And lastly, that number right there, 80% experienced bullying at work. So that's after school. That's after university. So you can get through all of that and be standing up and be trying to be proud, trying to hold on to the last shreds of your self-esteem, and chances are you'll end up bullied in the workplace. There is such a gap because of isolation, because of self-doubt, discrimination, bullying, lack of acceptance, lack of support, stigma, and miscommunication. It is terrifying. So, my research is the minority stress model, and that is a model which has typically been used to describe the difference in life outcomes in minorities. So, for example, ethnic minorities, LGBT minorities, typically we see that they have a higher mortality rate, they have higher levels of anxiety, of depression. Basically, they have lives that don't level up to the expected. And you can keep saying that it is in some way woven in our genetics that we were born to fail, that we were born to be unhappy, that we were born to be anxious, and that we have nothing to offer the world. Which, fair enough, if you want to take that point of view, I think you're missing out on something really great. You should meet my nephew. Personally, I think that it's something else. And I think that if we level the playing field, the rate of depression, the rate of mortality, the rate of suicide, the rate of anxiety, the rate of self-harm, the rate of bullying, the rate of unemployment, the rate of people who are autistic ending up in domestically violent situations will rapidly decrease. Isn't that kind of funny? That all you have to do is even out the playing field. And you know what? It's time for a movement. It's time to change things. We as society, using the language that we use, using the words that we do, we build our society. It is something that is flexible, and it is something that's moldable. And we can either choose to keep it the same, or we can choose to change it now. And I tell you what, if we don't change it now, we are going to have a really, really big problem on our hands. Because there's only so long that you can suffer from suicidal thoughts without completing. We will have a generation that thinks that it is easier to take their own lives than to keep going. I don't think it's inevitable. I think it takes redefining what we class as ordinary. And lots of people have actually said to me, they're like, you do realize what you're doing. I mean, it's never going to work. And I look at them and I was like, you've never seen how determined I can be. And that's the thing. It takes a certain level of determination. Basically.
So as Dr. Botha shares with us, it does take a certain level of determination, which I know through experience my son has, and every autistic individual I've ever met has.
Depression.
So I'd like you to have a look at this 2015 study that was done in Sweden, where they were basically just looking at premature death. Because if you happen to be autistic, I would say not too long ago, a few years ago, um, your median life expectancy was 37. Nowadays, you're looking at 50, mid 50s maybe, which I suppose is definitely an improvement. But considering that, you know, ours are in the 70s and 80s for neurotypical, still much too low. I'd like you to take a look all the way to the right under suicide. And the way that the researchers broke this down is there's a general population, correct, which we know is 99% of the world. And then they split up mild and severe autism, as Dr. Botha shared problematic language, but we'll go with it. So for every 1,000 people in the general population, a third of a person has lost suicide. So to make that a bit more of a workable number, we're looking at what, 3,000? So for every 3,000 people in the general population, which is 99% of the world, we lose one. If you have mild autism, for every 1,000 people, 1% of the population, we're losing 3.5 or 7 in every 2,000. So 1 in every 3,000, 7 in every 2,000. And if you have severe autism, again, problematic labels, 1 per 1,000. And this is one of the main things that Dr. Botha talks about that we need to change, because a person can only suffer so long with depression, emotional pain, and suicidal thoughts before they act on it. So how can we best treat depression and anxiety in the autistic community? Cognitive behavioral therapy is the most widely used behavioral therapy shown to be effective at reducing the symptoms of depression and ASD. Many CBT programs have been adapted for the ASD population and focus on anxiety and aggression in addition to depression. Lisa, one of the co-hosts, is actually going to host a section where she just talks about CBT as a cognitive behavioral therapist, what she does, and how it is helpful, not only for people in the autistic community, but also for parents like you and me. Creative and expressive therapies are super helpful for people on the spectrum. Individuals with autism also struggle with verbal communication, and identifying complex emotions can be hard, so creative expression can help. Creative arts therapy provide a method of nonverbal communication and is a way to work through emotions that can be difficult to otherwise process. For example, art therapy, play therapy, drama therapy. I don't know if being involved in community theater is drama therapy, but it was certainly therapeutic for my son. Music therapy. Engaging in any of these therapies does help increase self-esteem, which is helpful to decrease depression. Social skills and support groups. So groups can be effective for helping people with autism connect and feel less isolated, which can also help reduce depression. So feeling less isolated helps reduce depression. These groups are particularly helpful for adolescents and teens and adults with autism or autistic adults. Support groups provide an outlet where people are surrounded with others facing similar struggles and issues. And the sense of camaraderie can improve depressive symptoms and help build healthy relationships. So connecting to others is a way to lessen depression. And we can understand that as neurotypicals, that when we're going through something really hard, maybe we listen to a song that reminds us that we are not the only person feeling these feelings. Maybe we talk to a friend who can understand. Feeling that connection is a human thing, and it definitely lessens anxiety and depression. One thing I learned about when I actually was researching this, would have been helpful to know many moons ago, is that while medications such as antidepressants are often effective in managing symptoms of depression in the general population, they have not been proven effective for people with autism. Now, if you deep dive into this, you're going to find about 80% of studies and scientists saying and agreeing with that, that there's no proven effectiveness for people with autism. And about 20% of scientists and studies suggesting that it does help. But if you look down at the lower left, here's a brain scan of people with autism, neurotypical people, and the overlap. And when they're doing a task, what parts of their brain light up? So the autism group is yellow. See lots of yellow. Blue, people like me, and green, overlap. See that itty bitty little spot of green there in the lower left-hand corner. So you'll see that when we think, the way our brains process things, it's not just that we say that the autistic population thinks differently and processes differently. This is proof that that happens. And perhaps that's why antidepressants don't work for them, because they are using different parts of their brains. Other notable treatments and interventions for anxiety and depression are, my son and I used Charlotte's Web CBD oil. So this is me as a parent suggesting this. It definitely did help my son. He has some pretty severe sensory issues, despite being in mainstream school and being able to look like he belongs out there with everybody else. He struggles a lot with sensory stuff that makes it super hard for him to cope. So when I tried this, he was 14, and I was kind of freaked out, to get it because I felt like I was doing a drug deal. I am such a goody two-shoes. It was hard for me to go into one of those shops and make that purchase. Now it's a lot more available. You can even order it online. But do not feel that way. There is no THC in any of this. This stuff's made from hemp. But the first day I gave it to my son, I gave him a big dose because, like I said, there's a lot of sensory issues. He comes home and he says to me, you know, Mom, the bus was still the bus, but today it didn't bother me at all. So for us, it really helped him because it kept his brain from reacting to all that sensory stimuli. It kept his anxiety down because that was one of the drivers of his anxiety. And it allowed him to handle a lot more tasks, stay on task, instead of getting a teen home who had been sensory overloaded from 7 a.m. to 3, maybe from 1 to 3. He may have struggled a little bit. Now, note it does lose its effectiveness over a year. So don't try to buy it late and save money. It's not going to work well. And it doesn't work for all autistic individuals, but it does work for most in reducing stress and aggressive behaviors. An example of an autistic person it did not work in, a mom I know gave some gummies to her son and he stayed up for 48 hours. So didn't really work for him. Grounding exercises such as a rubber band on wrist, take 5, which I'm also going to link in the comment section here, which is a nice anxiety lowering activity. And sensory aids. Also, if you want to rub your hands on your legs or on your chair, all of these types of grounding activities will lower your anxiety. You need to get into and stay in your right nervous system and get into and stay in your right brain. Mandy's going to talk more with us about these in the next section when we touch on trauma. You want to catch yourself when you're spiraling into thoughts that are negative or anxiety-inducing. What works for me is I tell myself to retrain my brain. So you have to stay mindful of when you're getting caught in that loop and stop that loop. In the beginning, it's kind of like you're really wrenching yourself out. It's a hard turn, almost lose the gravel. You're kicking gravel. You might spin out, but it's just that rough in the beginning. But if you continue to retrain your brain, maybe like 2 minutes later, you might have to uh, tell yourself again. Maybe then 5, maybe then 30, then maybe then all day you won't have to do it. It's a building process and it takes time. But being mindful of your negative thoughts and choosing to break that pattern can really work for a lot of people. A coworker who I really respect taught me some muscle relaxing exercises that basically start like with your fingers and your toes, and you mindfully relax them. Relax your fingers, your hand, your wrist, your forearm, your elbow, all the way in. And by the end, you're like a puddle of goo, and it's awesome. You feel so much better. It's like choosing to be relaxed. And I'm going to try to get her to maybe make a video about that we can add to our channel so that our members and the people who take this training can also use that. So that is it for depression. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Next up will be Mandy. We're going to touch on trauma because although that is not in our title, we can't really talk about the kids without mother, right? The cause is a precursor of anxiety, the precursor of depression, precursor of suicidal thoughts.